Welcome to episode 17 of the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod. Today I'm joined by the incredible Ibiene Warmann of Birthing Blissfully. Ibiene shares her personal journey reflecting on her fear of birth and the stark contrast between her two birthing experiences. We'll dive deep into the transformative power of birth education and explore how gaining knowledge can empower and positively shape your birthing experience. Whether you're preparing for your first birth or reflecting on past ones, this episode is packed with insights and inspiration. So let's get started.
I'm Ibiene Warmann, and I am the founder of the Birthing Blissfully podcast and the Birthing Blissfully program. Basically, Birthing Blissfully is my baby when it comes to childbirth things. I'm actually a software developer, recently doing some work in data science, but as concerns what we're talking about, I really love to work with pregnant women to help them just prepare more effectively for childbirth in a way that helps to reduce the chances of complications and just help them approach the experience more confidently. I just like to say that I'm out here championing safer, more pleasant birth experiences. And so that's what I do at Birthing Blissfully.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm going to go right back to the start of this. And is this because of birthing experiences that you've had that led you here? Kind of where are we with that?
Okay, so my journey to Birthing Blissfully is actually born out of my personal experiences and the fears that I had around childbirth. So before I ever thought about having any babies, I was obviously around a lot of people who had had babies, and anytime I heard anything to do with childbirth, it was about the being like the most painful thing anyone could go through. You would hear about the complications. You would hear about things that, almost happened to people or happened to the babies or happened, they had to have an emergency, this, that, and the other. Basically, there was really nothing I was hearing about childbirth that made me feel like it was something that I wanted to go through. Yeah. And so there was just this subliminal kind of like buildup of fear in me about childbirth that I hadn't necessarily realized how serious it was until I got married. And then when I got married, I remember my husband and I had this conversation at the start of our marriage. And it's like, let's just wait about a year. Let's enjoy ourselves before we bring any little people into the world. And I was like on board with that. Like, of course, let's wait a year.
And let's wait a few years.
The year went by quick. And I remember it was like a Mother's Day, one of the years, and he gave me a card. And in the card, he was writing all these things like, "Oh, you're going to be an amazing mother." And at the end, he was like, "P.S. I'm ready." And I was like, "Ready for what? Not your body that's going to go through this. You're not the one that's going to almost die." And I think I shocked myself, but I definitely shocked him. Yeah. And so I think it was at that point that I realized how seriously scared I was of childbirth. Mm-hmm. I think that was a point, that was like a turning point for me where it was kind of like, okay, this is an issue. Because I knew I wanted to have babies. It wasn't that I didn't want to have kids. It was literally this experience sounded so hellish. Yeah. And so that was kind of like my lead in into the whole childbirth world. And so I knew I had to deal with it. I was very lucky. I came across some information. No, actually, the first thing that happened to me was I got trapped in my best friend's birth. Her husband had gone out of town. Her mom wasn't in town, and her waters broke early. Like I think she was 37 weeks or thereabouts. Yeah. They weren't expecting the baby to come that soon. And no one was around. And we just had lunch. She got home, her waters broke, and I got a call saying, "Oh, I think my waters just broke." And I'm thinking, what does that have to do with me? So anyway, long story short, I got trapped in the birth of my best friend, which was something I didn't want to be around any childbirth, anything. Yeah. But it helped me in an interesting way because I was able to actually see somebody else go through it. And thankfully her birth experience wasn't like one of those ones that went, like really negatively or anything. Yeah. So I realized this is hard, but I think I can do this. Yeah. And so, that kind of helped me start to prepare myself to then get pregnant. And when I got pregnant, I then got lucky again in that I stumbled on a lady who had just moved from America to the UK. Her husband had come for work and she had come with him, and she used to do childbirth education, which funny enough, I didn't even know existed. And so
That's a thing,
Work,
though, isn't it? We're like, even just as women, we let each other down, don't we? Because we don't actually talk about it. And then what we do talk about is that, oh, well, I nearly died. And it's like, hang on, there's a whole other level to this.
there's so much else. And what I found interesting when I was learning from her, and then obviously I went down this whole rabbit hole after, like it became a whole thing for me because of how scared I was. I was the most diligent student. Like literally, I was paying close attention to everything she was teaching. But apart from that, I was going and checking out other stuff. And I really, really was determined to almost like follow as closely as I could with everything I had learned, because I wanted to see if it would make a difference for me. And so I remember when I would learn stuff, I'd speak to my friends who already had kids, two, three babies,
Yeah.
and they were not aware of the stuff she was teaching. They weren't aware of the stuff I was learning. And a lot of it, which is what I do now with Birthing Blissfully as well, is passing on this information that helps you to trust in the intelligent design of the female body.
Yeah.
Right? It's like one and all agree, regardless of whether you believe we came from the Big Bang or whatever, everyone agrees that the human body is so intelligently designed.
Yeah.
There's so much going on at any given time. And the more you can understand about what helps it to work well, the better chances you have. So for instance, before people realize maybe excess sugar can kind of lead to diabetes and stuff, people were getting diabetes, but people didn't really know why.
Yeah.
And then the instant you kind of realize, okay, if I change this, or if we're careful about processed sugars, then we're less likely to fall into this bucket of, like illnesses, then you can make a change. But it doesn't exempt you. Just the fact that you don't know that eating in this improper way can lead to this disease, it doesn't exempt you. You will have that disease.
Yeah.
And so I realized that was what was happening with a lot of childbirth experiences. It's kind of like we don't necessarily have a lot of information around the natural design of the female body and what helps it to do well in pregnancy and childbirth. And so we have our cravings. We kind of like we don't necessarily know what to do. And at the end of the day, it actually matters what we do while we're pregnant, in terms of the experience you have as a pregnant woman and the experience you have during childbirth. And so for me, this was a whole world that opened up to me in that, okay, here is how the female body works in this instance. Here's what you can do to help it. So I'll give you an example. Nutrition, for instance. We always hear you are what you eat.
Yeah.
And it is so true in the pregnancy scenario, but we don't realize how true it is because, for instance, when you ask someone about eating in pregnancy, you usually hear stuff like, oh, just make sure you eat a balanced diet, like make sure you eat, have your veggies, your fruit, and so on. But a balanced diet doesn't really mean one thing, because for an athlete who's preparing for the Olympics, a balanced diet means a completely different thing. They know they need to beef up on certain things. And it's just likewise for the pregnant body. So a balanced diet for you as a pregnant woman is not what a balanced diet is for someone who's it's a different goal.
Absolutely.
So it was eye-opening for me to realize, for instance, just how the pregnant body requires so much more protein, in terms of, forming the baby, making sure that, certain things certain risk factors are driven down. And it was things like that, because there's an example I always give when I'm speaking to my clients about this whole concept of the natural design of the body and giving it the tools that it needs to do well. And I often say, so the body knows how to give birth. The body knows how to form a baby. Just like the body knows how to do a poo. If you need to poop, your body knows what to do.
Yeah.
Now, there are things you can do to make that process more seamless. So if you eat your fibers, you drink, you stay hydrated, it helps the body to do that more seamlessly. Now, if you're not aware, or maybe you're just, uninterested, you're not really drinking any liquids, you're eating a lot of stuff, you end up with something called constipation. So even though the body knows how to do a number two with ease, in that scenario, it's not received what will help it do that very well. So you end up with constipation and it becomes a harder job. So similarly, for pregnancy and childbirth, there's certain things that if you understand about nourishing the body, if you understand about, managing certain things with the body, if you do those things, this process that the body knows how to do just can be more seamless. So it's things like that. It was things like that that I learned, and things like that that brought me into this space. And I think realizing how everybody around me who had, like I said, 2-3 babies had no idea. They had no clue about all the stuff I was learning. That made me just start thinking, everyone needs to know this. And so I kind of like, you know, I didn't know I was going to be doing something as large scale as Birthing Blissfully, but I kind of started like, you know, shouting out about it because I'm just that way. If I find something that works for me, I don't shut up about it. So it became childbirth and pregnancy became that thing. Especially when I had my son and I had an amazing experience. So,
but doesn't it just go to show though, because of something that you didn't know existed, you found it, and then you've gone, oh, by the way, I'm sharing this information with other people. Then everyone's come to you, and as you said, you have evolved into something much bigger than what you thought you were going to be. But that's because there's a hole, because this information is needed, and there are people out there going, give me the information that you have, and they're coming to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, in fact, I remember after I had my son, and let me just kind of like circle back to my birth experiences. So with my son, I went into the hospital at about 2:30 p.m. I had him at about 4 or 5, thereabouts. So like, you know, soon after I went in. And because of how everything went, literally, like I had I'm so scared of needles. I'm one of those people that, you know, like I still like literally taking my blood is like, oh my gosh. And so for me to have an experience where I gave birth in the birthing center, so it was a bit of a less, I guess, formal space, and I ended up not needing any pain meds. I literally had no needles in my body at all. I had him, and I literally had no tears, no stitches required or anything. And so by the time I was done, I was told that there was like a 6-hour observation window that was compulsory in the NHS. They have to watch you for 6 hours after you give birth to make sure that you're really okay before you can go home. I was literally free to go home after 6 hours after having my baby. And for me, it was nowhere near what I thought childbirth was when I was so scared of it. I didn't know it was possible to have an experience that was that seamless. And now when I talk about my birth experience, I'm a bit careful with how I talk about it, because I don't want it to be like an aspiration where it's kind of like, oh, she went in and she was out in 6 hours. She had no pain, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's not, so I don't promote that. But what I really, really try to drive home, and the message for me is, childbirth is not as unpredictable as it seems. There's a lot of information that can help you make better choices while you're pregnant that can lead to a better birth, more pleasant birth experience. There are medical choices that if you understand, you can make them with you can just make more informed decisions that can also lead to a better experience. And being well informed puts you in a position of relative calm, which again contributes to a better experience. Because just talking about the design of the body as well, there are things like being really scared or being super anxious actually releases hormones into your body, which are counteractive hormones at the time of childbirth. It can literally extend the length of your labor, because now your body is dealing with other hormones, while the hormones which are actually supposed to be bringing the baby into the world are trying to do their work. Then the adrenaline comes in, and there's
everything.
There's so many factors.
Absolutely.
So it's a combination of factors. It's understanding medical choices. It's understanding what to do while you're pregnant. It's also now having that confidence that puts you in a position of calm, so that those additional things like extra hormones you don't need to be dealing with are not are not in focus, and they're not in your body at the time. And so that's the message I try to drive home more. I don't try to say, oh, you know, my birth experience was near perfect, so therefore everyone can have it. I'm just literally like, you can put yourself in a better position to have a safer and more pleasant birth experience if you can wrap your head around these things, you know. And so part of what I do with Birthing Blissfully is I work with a framework. What I teach women really is a framework of how to approach their pregnancy and childbirth. And it answers questions like, what do I not know about pregnancy that will be helpful for me to understand? answers questions like, what do I need to do on a day-to-day basis as a pregnant woman to put myself in a position for a more pleasant experience? So that's things around, like I've mentioned, nutrition, stretches, things that just prepare the physical body, that prepare, the insides of your body. It's understanding there are things I can do day to day. These 9 months are not just 9 months to sit down and then wait for what happens at the end. Like I can literally do things now that set me up to do better at the end. It's questions like, now that I know I have a big day coming up, the day of my delivery, there's a bit of action planning. What do I want to bear in mind about this day coming up? And so that's where things like birth plans come in. That's where things like understanding some of the medical choices you can make while you're in labor come in. And then there's what I like to call confronting your fears and limiting beliefs. So it's things like now understanding how you can get yourself to that place of confidence, get yourself to that place of calm, where you're almost looking forward to the experience rather than afraid of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then of course, I talk about emergency scenarios. So making decisions in emergency scenarios, because again, we know that things don't always go as planned, but when they don't go as planned, how do you want to make your decisions in that time? So it all aims to help women get better outcomes, and it's really helpful. I find as well that it's really helpful for the healthcare professionals that you deal with, whether it's a doctor or a midwife, because when you go in prepared, you're an easier patient for them to kind of work with.
Absolutely. I mean, I've literally jumped from a podcast where I've been a guest to recording this podcast with you, and we're talking about very much the same things, but in a slightly different way. And I found that everybody that I've spoken to, there's 2 or 3 underlying themes that literally run through all of it. And one of the main ones being that if you are educated, you're informed, and you know what your choices are, everything else is so much more easier. Because even if, like you say, you do go into an emergency scenario or an emergency situation, you've already got that knowledge of what that might be or what you want your choice to be in that situation. And if someone comes in and goes, I don't know, we're going to have to do an emergency C-section, you're not then going to go be blindsided and go, I don't know what that is, I don't know what's going to happen, and do we do this and do we do that? Because you've already got that information and you can go, yes, let's go, give us the papers to sign. You've already got that information and you're not panicking. And again, another thing, I think it was the podcast that I literally last week I actually aired about hypnobirthing. She talks about the pain frightened, I think it's the pain fear cycle. So when you're afraid, you tighten up. If you're tightened up, everything's more painful. If everything's more painful, you get more fear. And it's about breaking that cycle. And if you can stop that cycle from happening, let alone break it, you're so much better off in a better position. So I'm loving everything that you're saying. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it hits the nail on the head. And it kind of ties into exactly what I was saying about understanding the natural design of the female body.
Yeah.
Even that, because the truth is, when you feel a contraction, that is the default response. Like clenching up the tension. If you've not been told, like she explained, that actually causes childbirth to be more painful, or like if you don't understand that, then if no one's ever told you, you've never heard it, then you are likely to tense up, and so you are then likely to have like the experience that a lot of women complain about, or a lot of women talk about when they're talking about childbirth. And just understanding that and preparing for it can put you in a totally different bracket. Like when I had my son, literally they had said to me at the hospital, sometimes they say, oh, come when your contractions are 3 to 5 minutes apart, or they give you kind of like a point, right? With me, what they said to me was, oh, come in when you can't bear the contractions anymore. And that sounded like good advice. Except that I had preparation that a lot of women don't have. So I was doing so good with the, because I'd learned all of my relaxation, my breathing. I was doing the things because, like I said, I was a diligent student. I was too scared of having a bad experience. I was literally like doing the things like so diligently that by the time I was leaving home, by the time I realized, gosh, I need to leave home, I felt like I was ready to push. Like I literally felt I had done so well, that I had been home for so long, that that pointer of when you can't bear it anymore never came for me.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, oh my gosh, we need to get to the thankfully my hospital was literally 5 minutes down the road. So we made it there in good time. But it's such a it's so it's so interesting to see how much of a difference it can make when you know the things
Yeah.
that can help
Yeah.
the situation. Yeah, when you
Yeah.
know what can help, it can make such a world of difference.
Yeah.
You know, and so with my son, it was literally, I never actually got to a point where I was in pain. I could feel the contraction, but it was almost like just a squeezing for me.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, you know, I know what that is. You know, it wasn't pain. I wasn't in agony at all. And so, you know, got to the hospital. It was already, like I said, I was already feeling like it was time to push. So he was out soon after I got there.
Yeah.
No stitches and all of that. But with my daughter, it was interesting because that was my second born. I was a bit more confident, right? Like, I've had one baby. I
Yeah.
know
I can
what I
do this
can
again.
do.
Yeah.
You know, and so I wasn't as diligent with the things. I wasn't as diligent with all of the things, but I still did okay. I was not in pain. And then I got to the hospital, and it felt like she was trying to turn around, because I think at some point she was facing outwards versus inwards. And
Okay.
so obviously her head was down, but, you know, I felt like she was trying to turn around, and it was taking some time to get to the point where I could push. And so, you know, I had my son on my knees. You know, again, birthing position. There's so much information that helps. Birthing positions helps. So I had my son on my knees, and so by default, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, like, I know what to do. I'll have her on my knees as well. And so I was on my knees, kind of like in labor, and for some reason, I had two midwives. One of them just seemed to be uncomfortable with me being on my knees. I think she was worried about my discomfort, and she was like, "Oh, you can't be in that position for so long. Your knees are gonna hurt." I was like, "I'm actually fine," but she kept trying to get me to change my position. Now, I kind of had my plan in my head, because, again, I gave birth on my knees last time. It worked out okay. I'm planning to do that again, but after a while, she kind of kept saying, "Oh, maybe you should change up. Oh, maybe you should get on the bed. Oh, maybe." And with my son, I would definitely not have listened to her, because, again, I was so diligent. I knew what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But with my daughter, I think I was a bit less worried about things, and a bit more open to listening to maybe opinions. And so at some point I was like, oh, you know what? I'll just get on the bed. I changed my position. I got on the bed. The next contraction that came, the pain that I felt, like, I had been blessed to not have felt pain at all with my first, and even in the second experience. But the pain that I felt, the way I jumped back off of that bed onto my knees again, it was almost, for me, a reminder that these things matter.
Yeah.
You weren't just in that birthing position. It wasn't just a birthing position it's advantageous to understand what the body thrives with. You know. And so it was almost like a taster for me. It was like, this is what women are when they're talking about the pain, this is what they're feeling. And I was like, this is crazy. You know, so I went back on my knees.
I mean, there's a difference between, do you want to move around a little bit? Do you want to get into a different position? Do you want to get into a squatting position? Do you want something to lean on? Shall we put something under your knees so that it's not hurting you that way, kind of thing? But to then be kind of being coerced into, well, we want you on your back on the bed so we can see better. It's like, well, actually, that's not better for me.
Yeah.
So it like you said, it was quite a quick, sharp shock for you of no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. And it was like, nope, no way, you know. And yeah, so that's the thing. So, and obviously, like, from watching movies and just everything that I'd seen as far as childbirth was concerned, that is the default position, being on the bed on your back, that kind of thing. And so, again, if you're not educated, or if no one has shared with you,
and that's all you've got to go off.
And so a lot of people are going through experiences that they don't necessarily have to go through. It doesn't have to be that way. And so people who do childbirth education and doulas and birth workers generally, I think that's the role that we're trying to play. It's that role of letting you know that you have options. It's not all as unpredictable as it seems. There are things you can do that can make a difference, and hoping that, you know, you get better outcome for some people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've got a couple of things that I want to go over before we kind of end, because I think we could talk forever.
I know.
But you were saying about the framework that you've got, almost like going through like birth planning and things like that. Is there somewhere that we could get hold of it, or do you do like an online course that goes through it? How's we're going to get through to that?
Okay, so what I do is that framework, I put it together for my program. So I have a program that I run, which is a group coaching program for pregnant women called the Birthing Blissfully program. I'm on birthingblissfully.co.uk. The information is on there, but I teach that at length within the program. However, it's like, it's an acronym. It's the SPACE approach to birthing blissfully. So S is the studying, understanding what you don't know about childbirth and pregnancy. P is the practicing. What am I doing with nutrition day to day? What am I doing with stretches day to day? What am I doing with preparing my body for the main event day to day? The A is action planning. So that's now talking about the D-Day. What are we doing on the day of the birth? What are we doing? What does our birth plan look like? What are some of the choices we want to make? The C stands for confronting fears and limiting beliefs. So now that's doing some of the inner work, the mind work, just getting to a place where you feel more confident, less fear. And then the E is emergency, how to approach emergency. So I do teach that at length on the Birthing Blissfully program, but that is the general approach that I teach, because I realize, there's not a one size fits all.
No.
But if you follow the approach, you get the information, you understand what you're practicing day to day, you understand what your plan is for the birth, even if it differs from somebody else's plan, at least you understand that there's a plan, you understand that, the inner work matters, and then you understand that emergencies could crop up. The framework helps you to just be more effectively prepared for them. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight chatting to you.
Oh, brilliant. You. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much to Ibiene for sharing her powerful story and wisdom with us today. Her insights into the importance of birth education and how it can transform the birthing experience are truly invaluable. If you'd like to connect with Ibiene or learn more about her work with Birthing Blissfully, you'll find all her information linked in the show notes. And if you're looking for more resources on birth education, be sure to visit my website, mother-gaia.co.uk. There you'll find links to my antenatal classes and all my social media platforms. Those links are also in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod.